sold 11 automobiles. I terrorized my family. I lost my Broadway career. I lost my sanity, my legal freedom, my bank account, my physical health, all of my friends, 2 marriages. All of that because of my active addiction. I just thought I'm a bad person. My family thought I was a bad person because they thought this was a choice. I thought it was a choice. The most life-changing moment was when Mel and Edgar sat down and we read the doctor's opinion in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was so fascinated by that, I went to school again and studied neurobiology because I wanted to understand why the steps worked for people who didn't believe in God, and I wanted to know more about brain mechanics and what exactly happened to me. Do we still have time? How much time do I have?
Good, Gary.
You good? You sure?
This is important stuff.
My grandpa was a preacher, and I'd call him sometime on Sunday and say, how'd it go today at the service? And he'd say, preached him down to 2. So that might happen. You know, those are the 2 you need to reach. So I studied neurobiology. I really wanted to understand the addicted brain. Excuse me. So, this is my mission, to educate people about this through the lens of 2024 neuroscience. And I'll tell you what, Bill W., that book had to be guided by the hand of some divine power. Because Bill was a night school lawyer, dropout. He invented insider trading. He was a very sketchy guy, but he was brilliant. He didn't know about neuroscience, but he nailed it. He observed every single detail. He even describes, I think it's on page 22, at certain times we are unable to pull forth into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the humiliation and degradation of a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. He is describing a phenomenon called amygdala hijack. You can Google it, look it up. Addiction, amygdala, A-M-Y-G-D-A-L-A, amygdala hijack. So we addicts and alcoholics, we've got a number of defects. You know, I even hate calling them defects now. Because for me, all of those, oh, bless your heart. Thank you. I'll even give you the whole priest blessing. There you go.
Him or the water?
I could do both. I could bless this and asperge everyone. Okay, give me 1 second to open this. Oh, thank you, God. All right, so I hate calling them defects now, really, because those defects have turned into my assets. They're the greatest gifts I've ever been given. Because I... Thank you, God, for keeping me humble. Next, my teeth will fall out. That happened one time on stage playing Bill W. One tooth fell out and it bounced. Everybody watched it, and then it went into the orchestra pit. In the next scene, some guy says, Mr. Wilson, I found your tooth. Anyway, to be a disease, there must be a defect in an organ. And that defect produces symptoms. For instance, you blow your pancreas out, it's not producing insulin. You now have a disease called diabetes, or diabetes, as some people like to say. For 100 years, medicine chased the symptoms. Dizziness, dry mouth, blindness, neuropathy, all kinds of things. They chased the symptoms, and everybody died from diabetes in childhood. Now, we chase the defect. You solve the defect, you solve the disease. So we replace the insulin, symptoms go away. Ski down a mountain, 200 miles an hour, slam into a pine tree, shatter your femur. Femur rips through the skin. Now you have a disease because the femur is an organ that produces blood cells. So now you got a disease. Everybody that has that condition is going to have the same symptoms. weakness, radiating pain, bleeding, infection. So you disinfect, you knit the bone, you put a cast on it, you sew up the skin, you stay off of it, and in time, the defect heals, and now you no longer have a broken femur. And anybody that has that broken femur has the same disease, same symptoms. So we call this a disease. Why do we call it a disease? We have a bunch of defects. Number one, we have faulty neurotransmitters. Number two, we addicts and alcoholics do not produce a sufficient quantity and quality of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter needed by the brain so that we can have a sense of well-being and be present in life. Every time we take an action that leads to survival, we get dopamine. The dopamine passes through the VT, that's called the ventral tegmenta. That's the pleasure track. It sorts out the neurotransmitters, and if it says, wow, a lot of dopamine, it sends a signal to the hippocampus. The hippocampus is memory associated with survival. It sends a signal to the hippocampus and says, hey, hippocampus, this is a lot of dopamine. Remember this and repeat this action always. Now there's a neural pathway in the brain for life. There's an area called the amygdala, A-M-Y-G-D-A-L-A. The amygdala does not have language attached. It doesn't think. So it doesn't know you have a job or kids or that there are consequences. It doesn't know about morality. It doesn't know that if Gary smokes crack, Gary will end up being chained to a bed naked wearing a clown mask in the middle of Times Square. It doesn't know that there's consequence because it doesn't think, doesn't have language. It compels us to take action that keeps us alive. First thing it does, it makes us breathe. It makes us drink water, sleep, eat food, have sex so the species can survive, and protect ourselves in fight or flight. Question for everybody. Can you hold your breath until you die?
No.
You're correct. That's the amygdala doing its job. You don't choose to breathe. You're going to breathe. If I jumped up and jumped on Damien, our wonderful juggler, with my big fat ass, and I'm sitting on your chest, and I put a plastic bag on your head and duct tape your neck, what are you going to do to get that plastic bag off your head? You'll do whatever you have to do, right? You'd kill me if you had to, because you need to survive. You're going to breathe. When you do, you get dopamine. So the hippocampus says, repeat this, and we keep breathing. Same thing happens with drinking water, sleeping, eating food, having sex, and protecting ourselves. It promotes survival. Now, crazy defect. When Gary took his first drink, there was an abnormal flood of dopamine. That happened because the nucleus accumbens, which produces the dopamine, is faulty. And the alcohol triggers an overproduction of dopamine. Our brains have been starved for this dopamine. Kind of getting off the subject a little bit. Is anybody here, when you were a kid, did you feel like you didn't get the memo? Like you didn't know how to do life and everybody else seemed to know how to do life? That happened to me. That was a lack of neurotransmitters, chemistry in the brain, lack of dopamine, epinephrine, and serotonin. So now I've got this flood of dopamine. It rips through the ventral tegmenta. The ventral tegmenta says to the hippocampus and the parietal frontal lobe and the basal ganglia, gets all those bad boys involved and says, oh my God, there's a tsunami of dopamine. This is better than sex, filet mignon, water, sleeping, or protecting ourselves or breathing. This is life itself. And a neural pathway is carved into the brain for life that says alcohol equals survival. The drug equals survival. That is not a choice. That is carved into the brain now. Now I'm living my life. I'm not a psychopath or a sociopath. I have a conscience. I love my mother. I say something awful to her. I can see that she's hurt. Now I feel guilt, and I feel shame, and I feel remorse, and I feel fear. Guilt, shame, remorse, resentment, anger, fear all produce cortisol, which is a stress hormone. It floods the amygdala. The amygdala is in pain. It rears its head. It swells up in size. It gives it the ability to override rational thought. That's what allows a good and moral person to kill if they're attacked. It overrides the rational mind. It's called amygdala hijack. The amygdala disconnects communication with the cortex. When that happens, the cortex fails to process. All thoughts of not using are trapped in the cortex. All thoughts of consequence are trapped in the cortex. All thoughts about my sobriety, about my kids, about my job are trapped in the cortex. I can't go in and think those thoughts. And the amygdala that doesn't think goes to the bar, calls the dope boy. Then I get high, I come down, I can't believe it's happened again. I feel more guilt, more shame, more remorse. Again, my brain is flooded with cortisol. It sends out the signal, get the drug, get the drug, get the drug. It demands relief, and the go-to is now the drug, more important than air, food, or water. So I go get the drug. I have no choice. That's what Bill was describing when he said at certain times we are unable to pull forth into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the humiliation and degradation of a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. Then, of course, once I put it in my body, the allergy kicks in. If it's alcohol, I don't have enough liver enzymes to convert the alcohol quickly into a carbohydrate. As it's converting it from ethanol to acetaldehyde to diacetic acid, it gets stuck at the level of acetone. That creates the phenomenon of craving. Now, the brain detects this toxic acetone. It says, here's another defect. We need more acetone to get rid of the acetone that's already there, and that demands a second drink. Now I got even more acetone. That demands a third drink. The more I drink, the harder I crave. If it's a drug, it's called hyperalgesia. It's in the brain. It makes pain more acute than it should be, and as the drug leaves the neuroreceptor, it causes acute emotional pain, and the amygdala now is in pain again. It demands relief. It says, get the drug, and I have to do another hit, and another hit, and another hit, and another hit, and I can't stop. And of course, it makes a mess of my life, and I feel guilt, shame, remorse, resentment, anger, and fear, which produces more cortisol, which inflames the amygdala. Here comes the mental obsession. Get the drug, get the drug, get the drug. Amygdala hijack. The cortex fails to process. It goes to sleep. I can't access thoughts of not using, and I go use again. And around and around and around we go. One night I went to Merchant's Cigar Bar in New York City, and I was drinking heavily, and I met this batshit crazy woman named Marcia. God bless her. She died a long time ago from this disease. We got really hammered. I said, let's go to my Times Square apartment and get really twisted. I've got some saline bags with morphine, my own IV drip machine, lots of crack. She says, great, here we go. We went, we did a lot of twisted things, so we thought we should get married. And she moved in the next day. We had a knockdown drag out. It was ugly. I left the apartment. I got more high, more drunk than I ever had in my life. I end up in jail. When that happened, my hippocampus, its job is to keep me alive. It's working with the amygdala. The hippocampus remembers conditions of our life that help us stay high and drunk. It also is the part of the brain that learns how to tell if food is rotten, where to get the food, how to cook the food, how to eat the food, what food's good to eat, what food isn't good to eat. It learns all that information. It's working to keep us alive. Now it's learned information about how to keep Gary drunk and high. Emotional disturbance gets me drunk and high because it causes amygdala hijack, which causes the mental obsession, which causes the cortex to go to sleep. So I got more drunk and high that night than I ever had before. I ended up in jail. My hippocampus now has a formula. Marcia plus Gary equals fight equals drugs and alcohol equals survival. Now, Marcia's not a sex partner, not a girlfriend. She is a delivery system for the drug. And this is a phenomenon of triggers. Wow. And this is why we can't stop. Why can't they stop? Frothy emotional appeal, our loved ones begging us to stop because they could, and we can't. And that happens whether I win the lottery or my house burns to the ground. Whether it's a nice day or a shitty day. My brain is flooded with cortisol. All my old resentments keep the cortisol in my brain. All my lack of forgiveness keeps the cortisol in the brain. 24/7, I'm walking around with a brain saturated with stress hormones. It doesn't take much for my brain to say, I know a solution, get the drug. Get the drug, get the drug, get the drug. It gets louder and louder and louder. And the amygdala disconnects from the cortex, and I can't stop myself from picking up. So what is the solution? Well, number one, we got to reduce the cortisol in the midbrain. Steps 4 through 9 give us relief. They are comfort for us. They give us relief from guilt, shame, remorse, resentment, anger, and fear, thereby reducing cortisol levels. Therapy also helps reduce cortisol levels. 4 through 9. Then in step 10, we practice no longer causing pain and suffering for ourselves or other people. I defy you to work step 10 every day and stay the same person. You will change and grow. If we stay the same person we were, that person got high. A change must occur. An entire psychic change if there's any hope of our recovery. Steps 4 through 9 give us relief. Now, here's the fascinating thing to me. I wanted to know why I had friends who were of other cultures, other faiths, lack of faith, atheists, and they got sober using the 12 steps. As it turns out, when you take spiritual action, helping other people, step 12, service, dramatically alters how the neurons interact in the cortex. They have a party. Did you ever get goosebumps? The hairs stand up in the back of your neck when you pray and meditate, or you do kind things for other people, or you talk about truth. The neurons are going crazy in the cortex, and we can choose to create this condition. When we do that, our thinking leaves our midbrain where our addiction lives, and it moves to the cortex, which is our spiritual center. When we're kind, when we're loving, when we do unselfish things, the neurons go nuts and they start producing more glutamate. That's another defect we addicts have and alcoholics. We don't produce enough glutamate, which is needed to calm the amygdala and the impulses that are happening there. So by simply praying and meditating, being kind, doing service, no matter what your belief is or your lack of belief, if you take those actions, you change brain function. And it allows us to sustain recovery. And our midbrain calms down, and we're now living out of the front of our brain. The big book tells us many times a day we remind ourselves we are no longer running the show, saying, "Thy will be done." These thoughts of God consciousness, these God thoughts must go with us constantly, it says. And we practice step 10, that's taking out the trash every day to keep the vessel clean. After we've taken the time to clean it out with steps 4 through 9, we got to keep it clean. That's daily housekeeping, as Dr. Bob calls it. Trust God, clean house, help others. It's that simple. Thanks God, I'll never be able to repay AA for the gifts that I've been given. And I'm so grateful to be here with you all. If anybody's interested to learn more about this, come and grab one of my flyers, go on my website. I have some of these talks you could share with your loved ones about the neuroscience. It helps them enormously to understand that we're not bad people, that we were ill, and that recovery is possible. So I think I'm done talking. God bless you all. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you.